Kia ora everyone, I'm TJ. Welcome back to my channel, New Zealand Mysteries. If you're new around here and you want to become part of a compassionate, caring community who want to raise awareness about cases and seek answers for victims and their families, you are in the right place. So please hit the subscribe button, which is down there somewhere, and join us. If you are a returning subscriber, you all know how much I appreciate each and every one of you. This is part 2 of the case of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope going missing and their murder, and Scott Watson, who has been convicted and sent to prison, and whether he is innocent or guilty. Just a reminder that this is Ben and Olivia's case too. They are sometimes forgotten. I'm going to hopefully get this into an hour. There's a lot of information to go through. If I can't, there's going to have to be a part 3, but I'm going to do my best. So let's get into it. From researching the enormous amount of info about this case and reading the comments of members of our New Zealand Mysteries community and other Kiwis, it is very clear that everyone has an opinion on this case and whether Scott Watson is guilty or not guilty of Ben and Olivia's disappearance and murders. And very strong opinions too. After reading the many opinions and theories, I started wondering, where have people got their information to decide on these opinions? Are they basing these opinions on fact or rumours and hearsay? Certainly after 20 years, with the case being reported on so often, lots of information has been offered to the public. Then it had to be circulated from hundreds and thousands of people, maybe added to, embellished, a bit like Chinese whispers when you're at school. People have watched TV shows and documentaries over the years and have thought of them as completely factual, which is not always the case. Media is well known for sensationalising shows to get more views, yet some of these are what we base our strong opinions on. So I ask you, do you remember what you based your opinions on? In the first video, we looked at 3 articles. 2 of them gave us information from both sides of the can, guilty, not guilty. We read an article from Mike White, a journalist from the North and South magazine, who interviewed Scott Watson and his dad, Chris Watson. And then we looked and read from an article from Andy Brotherston, a reporter who covered the case from the start and was also one of only 13 court reporters who sat through the entire trial. Let's take a look at some of the key points of contention that we uncovered and the different views. Let's go over the different boats. Guy Wallace, pictured here, had been working at the Furno Lodge serving drinks and took people in a water taxi out to their moored boats after the party wound down. Guy Wallace described dropping the trio off, Ben, Olivia and Mystery Man, to a 38-foot to 40-foot wooden ketch with 2 masts and portholes. This is the sketch that Guy Wallace drew of the ketch. When asked in court to compare Watson's boat to the one he described to police, Wallace said, "The only similarity is that they both float." Watson had a single-masted sloop, not a double-masted ketch. Here is the photo. Scott Watson's yacht was moored in the exact place Wallace dropped off Ben and Olivia and the mystery men. The Crown set out to prove that the ketch didn't actually exist. Out of the 500 witnesses, there was an absence of sightings of it on New Year's Eve. The article states that there were no reports, witnesses' accounts or evidence that could answer the following questions. When did it arrive in the Endeavour Inlet? Where did it sail from? Where did it moor or anchor on New Year's Eve? Where are the witnesses who saw it before New Year's Day? One of the thousands of photos police collected from the 1,500 plus people at Furno Lodge that night, why wasn't there one single photo of it? There were more than 100 boats moored off Furno Lodge that night, most of them skippered by their owners or experienced boaties. If anyone was going to notice this distinctly ornate ketch, then it would have been these boaties. Police interviewed all of them and none of them did. The article also states, Wallace, reported dropping Ben and Olivia and the mystery man to a vessel that was in a raft of 3 yachts. All the moorings off Furneaux Lodge were in use that night, so some shared a mooring by tethering to each other, a technique known as rafting up. That means Ben and Olivia and the mystery man were dropped off at a yacht that was tied up and adjacent to another yacht, and that yacht was tied up and adjacent to another. Boats are closely connected in a raft, and you can climb over the railings from one to the other. Yet no skipper, or indeed any of those on board any of their vessels, saw the ketch arriving or reported being asked by the ketch to raft up at any stage during the night. Even if the ketch slipped in after dark, there were people moving around all night between vessels, to and from the lodge, and sitting on their boats until 4 a.m, but no one saw it. Several witnesses reported seeing a very similar boat, a ketch-rigged scow anchored off the Furneaux jetty, which was ruled out early in the investigation. You can see it in the photo. What this means is that Guy Wallace was the only person who saw this ketch before Ben and Olivia disappeared. In Guy Wallace's first interview with police on January the 3rd, police asked him to draw the yacht. In this sketch, in the story, Wallace writes the word 38 to 40 foot ketch and puts a question mark and a couple of lines under the word ketch. That indicates that on January 3rd he wasn't sure if it was a ketch or not. He drew 2 masts on the yacht, one taller than the other. Wallace recalled seeing 2 masts. But he wasn't sure. He couldn't remember whether they were both on the same yacht or if the second mast belonged to the adjacent yacht in the raft. So crucially, on January the 3rd, Wallace drew a yacht, but wasn't sure if it was a ketch or a sloop. He describes it as being blue and white, with portholes and a lot of rope. In subsequent police interviews, Wallace adds more detail, including the brass portholes and ornate roping, and becomes adamant that it was a ketch. Why did Wallace embellish the details during each interview and become more certain, rather than less certain, of his description over time, which is what usually happens with the memory? Let's take a look at the hairs. There was only one piece of physical evidence in the Crown case. The 2 blonde hairs were found on a blanket on Scott Watson's boat and were forensically tested. DNA tests of 2 long blonde hairs found on a blanket recovered from Scott Watson's sloop were highly likely to have been Olivia Howe's. This puts Olivia in Watson's sloop. In the court proceedings, the defence focused on a 1 centimetre tiny little snip in the corner of the evidence bag that contained the samples of Olivia's hair required for DNA matching. The snip was tiny, but it kind of became a rip and then a hole, and the suggestions from the defence was that the scientist working with the sample bag while standing over the evidence, the blanket, the hairs fell out of the bag and onto the blanket, and Watson was a victim of forensic incompetence. So, was he suggesting that not only was he being railroaded by police, his luck was so bad that the forensic scientist clearly breached basic protocol to prevent evidence contamination? This is a huge accusation to make, to explain why these hairs were on the blanket from Scott's boat. Let's look at the mystery man. The mystery man was described as having long hair and being unshaven by Guy Wallace and other witnesses. Guy Wallace and other key witnesses were shown photos of Scott Watson and did not believe he was the mystery man. 2 identikit drawings based on the recollection of Wallace and 2 Furneaux Lodge staff did not resemble Watson. So this is one of those identikit pictures. A photo of Watson taken from that evening clearly seems to show he's got short hair and he is clean shaven. Watson said he had shaved shortly before the photo was taken. So he doesn't seem to fit the description or the identikit picture. Let's take a look at the police for a minute. The police focused on Scott Watson early on in the investigation. Supporters suggest he was essentially being made a scapegoat, that the police did not like him, he had been in previous trouble with the cops, and he was targeted. They claim that Scott was railroaded. They wanted someone to be held accountable for this crime and would make the evidence or lack of it fit their narrative. Painting of the boat. Scott claims he left the next morning and sailed to a mate's place in Tory Channel, where he obtained paint from that property and painted the size of his boat. Missing clothes. When Watson was first interviewed by police, he lied about what he was wearing on New Year's Eve. Later, photos emerged of him in totally different clothing. He was wearing a chambray blue shirt and denim jeans. Police asked him to bring those items into the station, but Scott didn't. He told police he couldn't find them because he'd moved around a lot and they could be at quite a few different places. Andy explains the context of this in her article. If you were innocent and had nothing to hide, you'd find the clothes. I know I would. If you were innocent and had become the prime suspect in a double murder, you'd find the clothes. You'd go to the ends of the earth to find those clothes. The Crown alleged Watson didn't want his clothes to be found and tested forensically. Also brought up was the lack of denial during the court process. Andy states, what was really striking was his lack of denial. He never once said, I didn't do it. At the time, this was glaring and telling. It seemed profoundly important to me, and I doubt it was lost on the jury. Bugged phone calls with his girlfriend. In court, both sides, the Crown and the defence, had access to the tapes, and they could use them to support their case, but only the prosecution used them. Andy explains her feelings about the recordings. She says, in my opinion, it was that Watson's manner was odd. It was unnerving. The word that I keep coming back to is smug. The whole thing seemed like a game to him. His responses to her questions were rehearsed or fudged. He toyed with her, and as the tape played, it became increasingly clear we were listening to a man lacking compassion. I want to look at Guy Wallace for a moment. Guy Wallace had been working at the Furno Lodge serving drinks and took people in the water taxi out to the moored boats after the party went down. I've seen suggestions that Guy Wallace could have been drunk that night and maybe it affected what he saw. There is no evidence of this at all. He was working, or no evidence that he had anything to do with the disappearances at all. Andy Brotherston interviewed Guy Wallace in 1998 and stated, he was deeply affected by Ben and Olivia's disappearance. It consumed him, even though it wasn't his fault in any way. I think he felt personally responsible for putting Ben and Olivia into the hands of their killer. I also think he desperately wanted to help police find Ben and Olivia by trying to remember details of the yacht, replaying it over in his mind time and time and time again. He appears to have transposed a lot of the detail onto the ketch from that elaborate ketch rigged scull. In January 1998, Wallace was under sustained scrutiny from police. He was also subject to unrelenting pressure from the national media, while heinous rumours spread like wildfire around Blenheim and Picton about him that were deeply distressing to him and his parents. Andy stated, few people have endured that inner circle of hell. The stress is unimaginable. It's no surprise he may have got it wrong. Sadly, in March this year, it was reported that Guy Wallace had died, and it was found out that he had taken his own life. So, after what we learned from these two articles and my opinions and thoughts in part 1, where does your opinion sit right now? Did you believe that everything was fact because I included it on my video and it appeared to come from credible sources and that I'm credible? You think I am? I took a poll on my Facebook page and on our YouTube page after the first video to try and gauge what people were thinking. Let's take a look. So this is my great Facebook page, New Zealand Mysteries. I hope you are a member of our New Zealand Mysteries community on here because this is perfect, great place. I love everybody on here. Let's take a look at the poll on the side here. I asked, Scott Watson, guilty or not guilty? After watching the release of my video, part 1 of this series, do you think guilty or not guilty? And I said I will do another poll after I release part 2 later in the week. And please be advised any comments posted may appear on the part 2 video. So overwhelmingly, 116 votes saying Scott Watson is not guilty. And from what I have seen, this is the case everywhere you look. When I mentioned I was making a video about Scott Watson, hundreds and hundreds of people commented on that. But with their very strong opinions, I must say. But when we came to adding the comments down below and they may be looked at, not very many people put their comments down. Let's take a look at the YouTube poll. So this is actually my channel dashboard. Not many of you get to see this, but we're going down to our community tab where I asked the exact same thing. Now on YouTube, the people who are likely to have voted in this poll, probably most of them don't live in New Zealand, they're overseas. So that might have made a wee difference. Let's see. This is heaps difference. So we have guilty at 27%, not guilty at 23%, 50% are not sure. 26 people voted in this poll. Very interesting. We get facts, perhaps from a police file. That would certainly answer a lot of questions and put to bed some rumours and hearsay. Ian Wishart is an investigative journalist in New Zealand. He has worked in radio, TV, newspapers, and he has legal experience, even representing himself in a court case. He has won numerous journalism awards and he has written 3 books on this case. Ian was able to get hold of the police file, which obviously contains information and witness statements from just after Ben and Olivia went missing. Some of these are a bit different to what the same witnesses remembered in later years. The memory is much more likely to be relied on and correct shortly after the events happen. So I was lucky enough to find a video where Ian Wishart goes through the evidence in the police file and tells us exactly what was in there. Going to be very interesting. Some of the issues he covers is why was Watson's behaviour hidden and why is it relevant, or is it relevant? Does he fit descriptions of the mystery man? Was he in the right place at the right time? Was a mystery catch involved? Why has Scott Watson lied? And of course, did Scott Watson murder Ben and Olivia? Now I'm going to go through quite a few points that I think are really important in this, but I'm going to also leave a link to this in the description box below so you can watch the whole thing. And of course, in the description box below will be heaps and heaps of sources that I've used. So if you want to do more digging into this case, get in there and have a look. So hopefully you guys will understand this. If not, like I say, go back through the video, he might explain it better. But he says all criminal trials ultimately come down to probability. Beyond reasonable doubt is regarded as a 95% likelihood or higher, which expressed another way is 20 to 1 odds in favour of guilt. Probability can be established forensically from DNA with likelihoods of 300,000 to 1, or even in really strong cases, 1,000,000 to 1. Circumstantial probability scores can actually be much, much stronger than DNA. That's because we can measure probabilities across multiple lines of evidence or events, not just one bloodstain. So still looking at circumstantial versus DNA. Those who demand DNA or nothing actually know very little about criminal proof. Beyond reasonable doubt is simply an expression of mathematical probability. If a DNA match with odds of 1,000,000 to 1 would convince you, how much more convincing is a strong circumstantial case properly analysed? Prosecutors call it strands of a rope. No single strand is strong enough to clinch the case, but woven together, probabilities are multiplied. They form a rope strong enough to convict. It isn't weak, it is far stronger than DNA evidence. Ian Wishart actually points to a book that has, or a TV, I think it was a TV show, called Murder on the Blade by a guy called Keith Hunter. And he refers to this quite a few times during this video. He said it single-handedly affected the beliefs of more than 500,000 people. He framed the debate. Nearly all who still believe Watson is innocent base their views on arguments drawn from Hunter's work. Interesting. So here's what the police file says. Scott Watson was known for threatening people with knives. One witness, evidence statement in police file, said Scott Watson threatened me with a knife. We had to go to court and Watson was fined $400. A second witness was said in 2016, High Protest, just doing a book on the Watson case, I see media saying he threatened Lawrence with a marlin spike. My understanding that it was a knife. Am I right? Yes, you are right. Why Watson's background is important. In a she said, he said case, where the only two eyewitnesses to an encounter give conflicting evidence about what passed between them, evidence of a third person that establishes a relevant propensity is unquestionably capable of satisfying the jury. Because it pointed to a relevant propensity, the evidence of witness Z was probative of a similar allegation by Miss London that played a significant part in the trial. So let's take a look at one of the first statements in the police file. And I want to just say, and please give a warning, I'm going to try and not say some words, but they're not very nice words. This was friend Andrew Averill. He said at some stage a tourist walked past and Scott said, "Rape the bitch." Another time a young girl walked past us and he said, "Show us your tits." He yelled it out so she could hear. He actually said, "Show us your tits, you slut." He was always saying things like that. He told me since that the way to make money was to make movies of raping women and killing them. He called them snuff movies. He was stoned when he said this. He is always talking about things like this, and he would quite often get really worked up about it. So this might try and tell us a bit about his character. But this is only one person, one statement. So let's look at another one. So here's another friend talking about Watson. Nothing set him off, it just happened. Basically, he was talking about killing everyone in the bar. It's hard now to describe how it was that he was talking, but I remember trying to change the subject. I remember him talking about using a slasher to kill people, which I found gruesome. I remember Scott in general terms talking about murder and weird things. I remember him asking Vicky if she wanted someone murdered. I was getting pretty sick of the way he was talking. It was very awkward to get him off the subject. He kept coming back to the subject every time Vicky or me tried to get him talking about something else. Okay, so we're hearing from a second person that describes this behaviour from Scott Watson. Is there a third? Friend Vicky Eastgate evidence. I don't remember exactly what was said, but I felt he started talking about snuff movies. That is movies where someone actually gets killed. I remember thinking, I don't need to hear about this. They apparently started being rude to her, saying things like, "Show us your tits," and carrying on. Scott was going on about how she was a real dog. At about that stage, Scott started saying something to the effect of how they should have bumped her off. I can't remember how it came up, but Scott started getting on about murder and how easy it would be. He started going on about if I wanted anyone murdered, he would do it for me. He had this real evil look in his eye, and he was very intense. It takes a bit to make me nervous, but the way he was talking was making me scared. He seemed to have psyched himself into it. Every time I changed the subject, he would bring it back to murder and murdering someone. So 3 independent statements in the police file that was taken immediately after the events. And this is what 3 people had to say about Scott Watson. One person telling the story might not mean anything, but when you get multiple people saying the same thing, it is called corroboration. A couple of months before this big event happened, His girlfriend tells of a story and why she dumped him. Scott had been telling my boss's 15-year-old son the benefits of drugs, that he'd been feeling up two women, which is a sexual assault by the way, and that he'd been drinking bath oils from the bathroom. Yeah, I would dump him too. Now, we have a case or a witness interviewed, and this was about an attempted rape at Knife Point. He stood in front of the door. It was a large, older style door. He said, don't leave, why don't you stay for a while, or similar. Scott then said, come into a bedroom. I said no. He pushed me up against the wall and pulled a knife out from his boot and waved it in front of my face. He again asked me to stay. I again said no, and he held the knife up to the side of my throat. He was speaking, going over, come into my room, come into my room. He sounds like a stellar guy. Okay, so let's talk about a few things you haven't heard as well, a little bit more. This was from a Christchurch court journalist, and this was in the police file. Watson was on remand in Addington Prison. He attacked another prisoner in a toilet with a knife-like weapon. The charge would have been assault with intent to do grievous bodily harm. He appeared in the Christchurch District Court, and there were blanket suppressions imposed so as not to prejudice his upcoming murder trial. As I remember, it was subsequently pleaded guilty and he was sentenced, but all details continued to be suppressed. Let's look at another one. Mariner recounts experience of his police officer friend. My mate Peter was leading Watson back to the cells when he said something to him. Pete didn't catch what he said, so he leant forward towards Watson. That's when Watson headbutted Pete, smashing his nose, and then hissed in his ear, "You'll never find the fucking bodies." Wow. So this guy is loving his knives. He's used these in a lot of attacks, and then a headbutt against a police officer. Scott Watson was actually charged with this. This is a report from the Wellington Court report in the New Zealand Herald. Convicted double murderer Scott Watson headbutted a police officer when a stash of homemade weapons was discovered hidden beneath the bedding of his cell. A search of the Blenheim police cells where Watson was held a year ago revealed a shaft of metal and piece of wood pulled from the hand basin and a chunk of concrete from the wall. Watson, who was serving a life sentence for murdering Olivia Hope and Ben Smart, yesterday pleaded guilty. So there's so much information that nobody has been told about Scott Watson when they've been forming these decisions. Let's move on. Ian Wishart was sent a letter, name and address supplied but held back, and we just want to go over this letter. Evan was in court for a traffic offence with a man he later recognised as Scott Watson. He was boasting about how he'd killed and that the bodies would never be found. Evan said he was covered in tattoos from head to toe, but later he always wore a good suit and tie so that you'd never guess, and he looked better. Another man said to him, "You better be careful what you say, it could be bugged." Scott Watson threw himself on the man and started punching him. Then two cops came in and dragged Scott away. Evan said he had no doubt that he did it. He said, "I think from memory this may have been an Addington remand prison or holding cell somewhere. My mother's friend was in a cell close to Watson's and could clearly hear his rantings, as could all the other inmates. Evan was a young friend of my mother's who ended up being sent to Invercargill prison, which is why he was in the cells too, and witnessed Scott Watson's rantings. From memory, he was boasting about the details of the crime, such as what Ben and Olivia suffered before their deaths." Okay, you may say that we don't know if this is fact, but it certainly ties in with the behaviour that we've been looking at in the police file about Scott Watson, and he's charged with some of that behaviour. So it definitely ties in with it. Evan was not a police secret witness. This was a story he told to people close to him. He gained nothing and sought nothing. The key points are he personally heard Watson boasting inside Addington about killing Ben and Olivia and witnessed Watson's violence. Ian Wishart concluded that this testimony was credible. A couple of other points to remember. Watson's girlfriend testified he was covered in tattoos. He was really worried about the police releasing a description of a person with tattoos on his arms. The accused had a number of tattoos. He had the letters FL on his left wrist, a Nazi SS symbol on one of his left fingers, a barbed wire across his right wrist. On his left shoulder blade was a star, an eagle on his left upper arm. On his left forearm he had a large long tattoo which has a skull in it and the word skin as well. And I think he also had a tattoo of the British flag on his right forearm. So, in the report, Watson's lawyers had prior deeds hidden from the jury in the public. This is a statement from Judge Heron, ruled just before the trial. Earlier statements as to violence and attitudes to women are too remote in my view, and any probative value is outweighed by the prejudicial value. The overall impact of that evidence, particularly in such quantity, is highly prejudicial, and in my view it has to be carefully screened. There are references to the accused saying he had been in prison, and there can be no mention of that to the jury. There are references also to drug taking, and despite the Crown Prosecutor Mr. Rafferty's submission that I should let that in, I declined to do so. There is to be no reference to drug taking. The critical thing has to be the actions of the accused at Furneaux Lodge during the evening with the limitations that I have put on them. So, in the trial, the jury never heard all about his violent past. We in New Zealand are one of only a few countries that actually has this happen. Do you think if the jury knew of his violent past, it wouldn't change a thing? I think they just would have been more probably knowing that they did the right decision. So, Wishart says that issue 1 is proven. Watson was a sexual predator capable of murder. He says, juries are not allowed to know prior criminal activity until trial is over. Arguably, in light of appeal court and Supreme Court rulings, Justin Heron should have allowed propensity evidence of violence and sexual harassment of women, as it proved he was a sexual predator, waiting for his opportunity. But rape the bitch, show us your tits, slut, and his fantasy about videotaping the rape and a murder of a woman were not allowed in evidence. However, the jury decided guilt without this. Despite suppression lapsing at the end of the trial, a whitewashed version of Watson has been portrayed up until now in the media, which is very true because I haven't seen this violent person being portrayed in the media at all. If I had, would I have thought differently of his guilt or innocence? Evidence shows Watson had the mindset of a sexual killer. He is capable of murder. On its own, it doesn't prove he's the killer, but it sure as heck shows it would not be out of character, and it makes him a valid suspect. Just quickly before we move on, nzmissing@gmail.com if you want to get hold of me and perhaps suggest any cases. We are on Facebook and we have an amazing, lovely community on there, very supportive. Would love for you guys to join us. We also have a website that you can look at. You can go to podcast and listen to this instead. If you can support the show with a $3 coffee, I would love for you to buy me a coffee. Go to buymeacoffee.com/NZ Mysteries, and that's a great way of supporting the show, which is really appreciated. I have a goal where if I get to a certain level, I'm going to donate $500 to Victim Support New Zealand, so would really love help with that. There's other ways of donating, and all of this is going to be in the description box below. Please like the video or dislike, whatever you choose, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell to all so that you'll get notified when I release updates or videos, and share this where you can. These things don't seem important to you, they're very little, but they mean a lot to the channel. It means that the algorithm with YouTube will actually show the video to more people, and that's what we really want. So thank you so much for your help. Alright, so let's keep going. Watson's supporters argue all this is irrelevant. The police didn't take these allegations seriously, or they would have used them. These claims from Watson's supporters are factually wrong. The police wanted to use this evidence, but were not allowed to. Let's go into issue 2. Does he fit descriptions of the mystery man? Take a close look at these 2 photos. There's a couple of key similarities. The widow's peak, centered fringe, drooping eyes, the eyebrows, the lips, and the chiseled face. Even though most supporters of him say this doesn't look like him at all. Photos on that night show Watson clean shaven with short hair, which doesn't match the description. Or do they? Photos that night show Watson clean shaven with short hair, or do they? Watson clearly has stubble, or as Larry McKay pictured in the same photo told police, Scott looked about 5'10" tall, 75 kilos, Caucasian, slim build, unshaven, a couple of days growth, scruffy appearance. I noticed he had tattoos on him. He had brown, straggly hair. It wasn't long, but it wasn't short either, possibly to his collar. Guy Wallace put it in his very first interview witness statement to the police. The guy on the ketch would have been about 32, 5'9", wiry build. He was unshaven, but didn't have a mustache. Now, Keith Hunter, the guy that made that documentary, said Wallace did not describe the mystery man as having short brown hair at all, nor did he ever describe the man in terms that matched Scott Watson. The general thrust of his description of the man excluded Watson altogether. So let's take a bit of a look of the mystery man versus Watson, I should say. We're going to go through information and try and remember key points that stick out. Guy Wallace, talking about the mystery man, says he was about 32, about 5'9", tall, wiry. He was unshaven but didn't have a moustache. He had short, dark, wavy hair. This was on January the 3rd. About 32, he was about 5'8", wiry build. I think he may have had tattoos on his arms, but I can't be sure. His hair was a browny colour, wavy and medium length. He had about 2 days growth on his face. That's what he said on January the 5th. Let's look at another confirmed Watson sighting. Number 1, we'll call it. He looked approximately 28 to 30, but told me he was 26 with a New Zealand accent. He was approximately 5'8", medium but strong build, dark brown hair of shorter length with a slightly receding hairline. This guy's hair was longer than mine, but didn't cover his ears. His hair was short, but not really short. This guy didn't have a beard or anything like that, but he had a couple of days growth on his face. I don't recall a mustache. Okay, lots of similarities in there. They're just saying they had a couple of days growth, about 2 days growth. Lots of tattoos, about the same age, 28, 32. Dark brown hair, slightly receding hairline. His hair was longer. It doesn't cover his ears. Short, dark, wavy hair. Tattoos. Let's move on. Let's look at confirmed sighting of Watson number 2. They say, I would say he was in his 30s, about 5'7", 5'8". He had a small frame, but still looked athletic. He think he needed a shave. I think he needed a shave. His hair was short, dark, and not very messy. Confirmed Watson of sighting number 3. I asked him his name. I think he said it was Scott. He said he was 26, although he looked older than that, approximately 30 years old. He was short, between 5'6" to 5'8" tall. He may have had some stubble. He was average build, athletic, and he had muscly arms. He had tattoos on his arms. There was one large tattoo on one arm and some smaller ones around his hand. So let's look at 2 more. Shay Phipps, which I believe was on the water taxi, said he was Caucasian, aged between 26 and 32. His height was about 5'7". I would describe his build as wiry. He wasn't really skinny and he wasn't really built either. He had mousy brown hair and I think possibly brown eyes. I would describe his eyes as sleepy and that they were halfway droopy. I think his eyes were naturally like that. His hair wasn't styled or anything like that. It was about shoulder length, just at the back. His hair wasn't straight, but it wasn't curly either. It was somewhere in between. I think he was slightly unshaven, probably 2 to 3 days' worth. His eyes were the most distinctive thing about his face because they looked like sleepy eyes. Okay, let's look at the confirmed Watson sighting number 4. He was a male Caucasian, about 5'7", slim build. He was wiry. He had short, dark, wavy hair down to just past his collar. He had high cheekbones with slitty sort of eyes. He had like a day or two's growth on his face. He was wearing a blue long-sleeve denim shirt which had 2 pockets on the front. He was wearing brown cat-type boots and he was wearing dark blue jeans. Photos that night show Watson clean-shaven with short hair. Or do they? In this clip, in this photo, if you look here, Watson's hair was long at the back, clearly an inch below his collar line. Again, looking at this photo, his hairline is at the back, still touched his collar. Scott Watson's sister-in-law, Trudy Watson, saw Scott 48 hours after the murders, describing his hair as medium length at the time, not short, and wavy. His hair is dark, I call it black. It's not long, but not really short either. It's wavy. Remember, Guy Wallace's description of the mystery man. He had short to medium, dark, wavy hair. Monique Morrissey saw the mystery man from behind, talking to Guy Wallace. She said his hair was wavy and just above his shoulders. It was not tight curls, but just wavy. Where did his fringe go? Scott Watson lied about not trimming his hair to distance himself from the identikit. As you can see here in this photo, his fringe seems to have just evaporated. If we look at this photo from the night earlier on, you can see his fringe quite clearly in the middle, but here, nada. Guy Wallace, I believe photograph number 3, is the person who was in the bar and on the boat with me. At that time, however, he had good growth on his chin and face. He had a more unkempt look. His hair had more length to it and was more bushy and wavy. This meant that his fringe was lower down his forehead towards his eyebrows. It's the eyes of the person in photograph number 3 that stand out more for me than anything. The photograph portrays the person more as I remember him, that his eyes do not have an open, trusting look. The more I look at the photograph 3, it brings me back to the guy in the bar. All these photos were taken on the same day. Collar length for an observer depends on head tilt relative to the type of shirt he is wearing. Note the curls or the waves in Watson's hair and see how also it is cut unevenly. Now see how the water taxi passenger Hayden Morrissey described the mystery man. He said his hair was quite straggly looking. By that I mean it was quite wavy. It went down to just before his shoulder line. I think it was brownish in colour. He had long pants and I think he had a long sleeve shirt on. So the water taxi passenger describes mystery man, dead ringer for Watson. Fact, Watson hadn't had a haircut in 6 weeks. Here's what that looks like up close. Scott Watson has naturally wavy hair, scraggly, even, quite uneven. A low secondary to camera shot doesn't capture the finer detail, but this is what it looks like between haircuts. And you can see the fringe in the middle, but the receding, it's quite long in a way and scraggly and definitely wavy. Water taxi passenger Hayden Morrissey, his hair was quite scraggly looking. By that I mean it was quite wavy. It went down just before his shoulder line. I think it was brownish in colour. If we notice this picture here, he's got his head tilted a little bit to the front, which makes it seem that his hair is not as low. Fact, Scott Watson's own brother said Scott had collar-length hair when they met 48 hours after the murders. Even Scott Watson's own brother, Tom Watson, says Scott had longish, wavy hair, a little bit longer than mine probably. He was starting to go a little bit curly just above the ears, probably covering the top tips of his ears and possibly down to the back of his collar, down to the top of his collar, Tom Watson told the court. His hair was uncombed, it is coloured black and is a bit longer than mine. It would have been just over his ears and down to his collar. It is wavy. This is what he told police at the time of the killings. Mystery man description. Guy Wallace, about 32, 5'9", wiry build. He was unshaven but didn't have a moustache. He had short, dark, wavy hair. I think he may have had tattoos on his arms. So this was told on January 3rd and January the 5th. Shay Phipps, sorry, she's a bar staff. I thought that she was on the water taxi, but no, she was bar staff. Said he was Caucasian, aged between 26 and 32 years. His height about 5'7". I would describe his build as wiry. He wasn't real skinny and he wasn't real built either. He had mousy brown hair and I think possibly brown eyes. I would describe his eyes as sleepy and that they were halfway droopy. I think his eyes were naturally that way. His hair wasn't styled or anything like that. It was about shoulder length, just at the back. His hair wasn't straight, but it wasn't curly either. It was somewhere in between. I think he was slightly unshaven, probably 2 to 3 days worth. His eyes were the most distinctive thing about the face because they looked like sleepy eyes. Do you think there are sleepy eyes here? It really looks to me like the eyes in this picture are sleepy or droopy eyes. Amelia Hope in the water taxi noticed his hair. She said it may have been receding off his forehead. His whole hair was receding, but not majority. I could see his forehead through his hair. You could tell that it would have been if he had his hair shaved off. His hair was just sort of sitting brushed forward and sitting flat. Now let's look at some confirmed facts about Scott Watson versus the mystery man. So these are Scott Watson's facts and comments that he's made. He had come from Christchurch, was now a local to the Picton area, worked on fishing boats, was a boat builder, had built his own boat, had sailed alone to Furneaux, had asked for drugs, had tried to convince others to use drugs, had short, dark, wavy hair down to his collar and that did not fully cover his ears, and he smoked rollies. Let's look at Mystery Man, and this is via Guy Wallace and others. Had come from Christchurch, was now a local to the Picton area. He worked on fishing boats. This is stuff that, he had told these people. He was a boat builder, had built his own boat, had sailed alone to Furneaux, had asked for drugs, had tried to convince others to use drugs, had short, dark, wavy hair down to his collar that did not fully cover his ears, and this guy smoked rollies. So there's a lot of similarities between Scott Watson and Mystery Man, and these are confirmed facts. Okay guys, I'm going to leave part 2 here because we've got a lot to cover in part 3 and we're heading on just to an hour so far. I'm going to put a poll up again on Facebook and again on YouTube, and I want to know what you think now after we've gone through the police file and we've actually heard and got evidence and witnesses' statements about the kind of person he was. He liked guns. He was talked horribly about women, about the confirmed facts between Scott Watson and the mystery man, and what come up about the hair and the 2 days growth and whether he fit the identikit, and then also the boats. We had a look at those as well, and the hairs. So quite a few things that you've heard now to make maybe another decision on what you feel. Has your decision changed? Please comment underneath the post. Let me know if the comments or in the comments whether you've changed your position so far. And then after the last part 3, we will also do the same thing. I'm really interested to see how your positions change. So I will have a poll on YouTube. I'm going to have a poll on Facebook, so please go there for that. Be safe and be kind, and I will see you in the next video. Take care guys.